If you're outputting multiple crops and you want to limit the sharpening to areas of detail versus, say, areas like the sky that really shouldn't be sharpened, or perhaps water or some other surface where sharpening is not advantageous, then you may want to be using the masking feature. For example, if I just quickly generate an output, I'm going to shift click on sharpen, we'll get the sharpening output, and we've got our layer mask. Well, I might paint black on this layer mask on areas of the sky here, here, and here to avoid increasing any noise that may be present in the sky, because there's no detail there that needs any sharpening and it may expose noise. If I go and do that to each of my crops, then I would potentially have to go through and do one for Facebook and one for my Instagram Square and one for my Instagram portrait. It could become very tedious, and it would be nice if you could just specify one time which areas have detail and which areas should not be sharpened, or to get grain if you're using grain. And thankfully, there's a way to do that in the panel. Just go into your settings. You want to navigate over to the crop overlays, and you're going to look for these options for creating generic masks. Now, this is a pro feature. If you're in the free panel, you're not going to see this, but in the pro panel, you have option to create a generic sharpening mask and or a generic grain mask. When you turn these on, at the time you import your overlays, an extra masking layer will be added, and you can update that one single mask to be used on all of your outputs, including if you're just using the quick export. As long as it's in here, then that mask will be used. So let's say I want to just go and work on areas that are going to have foreground detail and try and avoid the sky. I have a few options for this generic mask. By default, I could output white, meaning everything gets sharpened. I could by default output black, meaning that by default nothing gets sharpening until I start to paint it in. Or I could use Protect Sky. And Protect Sky, what that's going to do, is going to take advantage of the Select Sky feature in Photoshop to help isolate these areas of sky so that they do not get sharpened while adding sharpening in these areas. I would say this is, generally speaking, not something you need to do. The existing algorithm for sharpening in WebSharp Pro is so good that it generally is not going to add any noise to your sky. But if you find any noise, this can be a helpful option to further reduce. And I think it demonstrates nicely how this feature works. So I'll leave this on. We'll click Done. And I need to add it in my overlay. So let's just start over. When I click on Crop Overlay now, it's going to import my overlays. But like I said, during the import stage, it's also going to add this generic mask for me. And you see it's being created right now, and it's taking a moment to select the sky areas. And you see this thumbnail here showing what is the equivalent of a layer mask. It's not actually a layer mask, so I can't alt-click on it to view it, but it's another layer that would then be used as a mask. And the reason it's not a layer mask here is that when you turn it on, it's designed to help dim the areas that are blacked out in the mask. Now, the Protect Sky option is not going to make the sky areas pure black. It tries to kind of strike a little bit of a balance. So it's actually going to go from gray to white. But you could push this further dark in these areas by just adding a levels adjustment. For example, go up to Image Adjustments, Levels, and just bring in the black point, and notice how the mask went to pure black. So you could make things a lot more high contrast. And you see in the preview here showing the areas that are not going to get sharpened from before to after. You just see how it's dimming these areas down. And it's done a really nice job of selecting the sky areas, with one exception, and that is this little bit of blue on the bottom of the bridge here. It seems to think that that is sky. So if I thought that needed sharpening, and it really doesn't matter here, I can just paint white on this mask. So I hit B for my brush, switch to a foreground white paint. I set my flow much lower like I normally do, and increase my brush size. And all I need to do now is just paint white on this area, and you see that's coming through. So I'm getting this preview of my mask, which looks a bit different than normal. And the way it's set up is in multiply blend mode at a reduced opacity. These settings do not matter. When this is actually used, the panel is going to ignore the blend mode. It's going to ignore the opacity. So if you don't like this version of previewing, you could go and say switch over to normal and 100%. And now you're seeing an exact layer mask. And then you could make decisions like, oh, I should maybe fill this in a little bit more, or fill this in if you're really getting picky about things. But it doesn't matter. I don't think it's going to affect things here. And then you can simply hide this. Whether this is visible or not also does not matter. If this layer exists, unless you delete it or rename it, as long as it has this layer with the expected name, it will use this for any of the overlays or quick sharpening. So I'm going to use this right now and just demonstrate that this will get used if I shift click on sharpen, which is going to give me the quick export of the full document. And you'll see that it gets pulled through and applied to my sharpening. So my sharpening now is not across the whole image. It's only in areas of detail and not in these areas of open sky. We can close this. And for example, if I was going to do multiple outputs here, so I've got the two Instagram and the Facebook versions, now shift click on sharpen, it will create all three of these. And because I held on shift, it'll leave them open. So we'll see that it's applying the mask 3 different times. And the fact that we have different crops or different output sizes does not matter because everything is mapped to the original pixels. So we can see that we've got the mask here, and we've got a little bit different mask here. And then with this different crop, we have this mask. So a really handy feature that one single mask can control the sharpening or the grain of all of your various layers.